Before I get started today on the substance of the talk, I'd like to acknowledge my colleague, Navina Damjanov, an oncologist from the University of Pennsylvania's Abramson Cancer Center. Navina is one of those so-called professional respondents whom I've had the pleasure of interviewing across a span of nearly 2 decades. Together, she and I developed this presentation and delivered it at the PMRG Institute meeting. Unfortunately, she can't join me today for this version of the presentation, so I'll do it solo, and let's get started. It would be hard for anyone working in marketing research in our industry not to know that physician response rates are lower now than they've ever been, and that they continue to fall. And just like slow economic growth, falling response rates are not just a problem in the United States, they're a problem of developed markets globally. And they're not just a problem among physicians, they're a problem among all types of professionals and among all of us as ordinary people. For example, in 2012, the Pew Research Center assessed the representativeness of public opinion polls. That assessment documented a 75% decline in response rates among U.S. households over the past 2 decades, from 36% down to 9%. Surprisingly, but at the time reassuringly, research results seem nonetheless to continue to be largely representative of the broader population despite the decline. But faulty election polls in the United States, Britain, and Israel more recently have heightened concerns about non-representativeness. Flanagan and his colleagues at the nonprofit Research Triangle Institute in North Carolina reviewed the literature on physician participation rates in survey research. They found that response rates among physicians averaged 10 percentage points lower than those among the general population, and they do that for a variety of reasons. Those reasons include physicians demanding work schedules, being approached often for participation, being difficult to contact directly, and at times lack of control over the use of their own time, particularly in academic and managed care settings. Now, one of the physician groups approached most frequently right now, if not the group approached most often, are hematologists and oncologists, like my colleague Navina. Physicians are contacted by all of us market researchers and other stakeholders from the pharmaceutical and biotechnology industry. They're also approached by academic, foundation, industry, and professional groups asking about their interest in participating in clinical trials or contributing to the development of clinical practice guidelines. And finally, they're also routinely contacted by solo investigators, often Ph.D. students or academic researchers looking to gather data for their own research agendas. In the Journal of Oncology Practice in 2014, Marzarello and her colleagues detailed a number of reasons physicians offer for why they choose not to respond to research solicitations, including the topic is uninteresting, feeling that the information being gathered isn't important, doubting that anything about their own opinions or practices would be a useful contribution to research goals, and inadequate compensation for the time. Now, from our experience, we know that physicians are more interested in learning about new therapies nearing commercial introduction than in merely telling us how they treat a particular disease today. Explicitly describing to physicians how research results will be used and why the research matters also enhances cooperation. We flatter key opinion leaders just by calling them key opinion leaders, and for emphasis, by telling them how their participation is essential to the validity of our research findings. And of course, we know that money talks. Think about how much you'd have to be paid to do some of the things that we ask of physicians. And what counts as adequate compensation varies by how interested physicians are. In other words, on their engagement. In fact, there's been increasing discussion among panel companies to start charging more for surveys that score low on engagement because of the difficulty of getting physicians both to agree to participate in the research and, importantly, to finish the surveys they start. There are other modifiable impediments to gaining physician cooperation and keeping their attention. Long-winded introductions can often be enough for a physician to defect quickly. Any solicitation that indicates that more than about 30 minutes will be required is immediately disadvantaged. Even worse, misleading estimates of time are infuriating to physicians. Some screener questions have taken Navina so long that she thought she was progressing through the actual survey, only to discover 10 minutes later that she wasn't even eligible for the research. She's had progress bars in surveys showing how much she'd completed actually go backward, saying she was 60% of the way through on the last question, but then only 40% of the way through at the start of the next question. She realizes, of course, that this probably occurred because answers she'd given earlier had put her into an additional section of the survey, though she doesn't know so much about surveys that she called them skip patterns. But the inaccurate feedback reinforced her skepticism that survey sponsors are being honest. And as you can imagine, physicians often try to complete surveys while they're at work, but for obvious reasons, they try to be discreet about it. Unexpected and loud sounds from the computer can be a problem. At work, when open doors are a part of the local culture, or at home in the evening when children or partners are sleeping. A screen display that looks like a computer game can carry similar liabilities. It's important to warn physicians in advance when audio will be required. Then there's one of Navina's biggest annoyances. When she walks into an interviewing facility and sees glue sticks or crayons, she cringes. She says that one of the reasons she went into medicine is because she's lousy at art projects. And she says it's hard to be a good sport when she's asked to draw a picture about how she feels when, say, she prescribes nivolumab or pembrolizumab. Given all of the challenges of securing physician participation, attention, and interest, both academic and industry researchers have developed an array of best practices to achieve representative samples. But we're not going to talk about more of those efforts today. Rather, we're going to spend the rest of our time talking about how we can wring additional value from the physicians who've decided to make themselves available for in-person qualitative research in a consistent, long-term way. Navina is one of those physicians. She began participating in marketing research in 1999 when she was working at Temple University in Philadelphia, and then continued after she moved to Abramson Cancer Center in the University of Pennsylvania Health System in 2007. Our many discussions over the past 17 years have provided a mountain of insights. Many, of course, have been specific to the products for which individual research assignments were conducted, but others relate to the changing landscape of healthcare and oncology care in particular in the United States over this time. I want to highlight three strengths of long-term collaborations with physician respondents. First, they provide a longitudinal and not just a cross-sectional perspective. These collaborations also have features in common with ethnography, and these relations foster trust and candor that is rarely achieved in one-time encounters. I'll talk first about the longitudinal perspective. Speaking regularly with a consistent set of physicians allows us to follow changes over time at the individual level. It also gives us the opportunity for prospective observation and examination of the dynamics of change. For example, right now, when Navina has patients she considers to be candidates for Yervoy, ipilimumab, She refers them to one of her colleagues who's experienced in managing Yervoy's side effects and toxicities. But in the future, she might retain and treat those patients herself. She and I together will be able to see whether she does, and if so, to explore the timing and circumstances associated with her change in practice. The change can signal an important inflection point for the brand, as well as provide insights that might be relevant to other products further in the future. Now let me turn to ethnographic features. And first, I want to be clear. I am not saying that serial interviews conducted over a long period of time is ethnography. I can hear you out there just claiming, already opposing a claim like that, and indeed you should. But I am saying that long-term research partnerships do share some features with ethnography. Each respondent's cumulative experiences become a case study, just as an ethnography focuses on a small sample in great detail. We can include not only individual characteristics that shape, explain, or enrich physician attitudes and behavior, but also societal and cultural factors. And we can explore not only management of a particular disease or use of a particular therapy, but a broader set of issues and trends in healthcare. And the physicians with whom we have long-term collaborations are some of those most likely to allow us to follow them and their staff in bona fide ethnographic study. Now, Namina and I recently talked about a variety of forces and trends in oncology, a conversation that I had with a number of other oncologists as well. I'll spend the last portion of our time sharing some of those findings with you. There have been striking changes in oncology over the course of the past 2 decades. There are new immunotherapies, many of which have surprised oncologists with their efficacy in solid tumors that they never thought would be responsive to immunomodulation. The pace of new products with novel mechanisms is so rapid that physicians are challenged to keep up. For example, it's increasingly difficult to be a generalist. Advances in genomics and molecular-based testing are helping oncologists narrow the choices of promising agents for individual patients. And the days of the lone, independent solo practitioner have been replaced with hospital-based care, team-based care, and care that is shaped and constrained by clinical guidelines. We'll look at some of these issues in greater depth. Consider the pace of new products. Physicians face steep learning curves with many new products, and often they have to master a number of new agents simultaneously. For example, Navina said, "I have great respect for the anti-CTLA-4s, and I know exactly who to refer the patients to if it's necessary." The increasingly personalized nature of new therapies also means that physicians might not see a lot of candidates, and in particular may struggle to make the best treatment choices. Another physician said the following: "When you do find a patient that fits a drug's profile, you might not be as confident in how to manage them sequentially over time." And with so many new agents available to oncologists, they have less mind space to attend to agents that look promising early in development. Some of these quotes convey the defensive strategies that physicians use. "Some time ago I decided whenever it comes, because it doesn't really matter until it's approved." And another said, "There's too much. You really don't have the time or the energy to follow something that's not yet available." It's also increasingly difficult, as I mentioned, to be a generalist. Navina explained the following: "One of the reasons she went into oncology was because she didn't think she could be a good primary care provider. She just didn't think she would have the depth of knowledge. But now in oncology, it's becoming that you really need to know your own area." And one of Navina's newer partners was a generalist in private practice, and now he's doing a certain kind of lung cancer. He came to her and said, "I never realized how little I know." It's just not possible to be on top of the literature for everything. Interdisciplinary team-based care is almost taken for granted by professionals today, and even by many patients. And there are many virtues of team-based care, and it's increasingly necessary with increasing specialization. But as Navana said, it's hard to involve a tumor board prospectively, especially if you don't meet every week. You see a patient, the patient wants to know what I'm going to do about a problem, and I can't say, oh, I'm going to have to wait 2 weeks to talk to the tumor board. Sometimes it's difficult to involve the people who need to be involved. Further, payers don't compensate team-based care adequately. For example, insurance may not cover 2 oncologists. They look at it like, well, you're both oncologists, so you should both have the same fund of knowledge. Physicians aren't paid if they see a patient in their outpatient clinic on the same day that the patient has been discharged from an inpatient stay, even though doing so might be more convenient for the patient and allow physicians to address clinical and educational issues that would reduce readmission rates and improve other outcomes. Most oncologists have no choice but to treat diseases that fall outside of their areas of expertise. This happens in academic referral centers like Penn, when an oncologist just happens to be assigned a patient because she's in clinic on a given day. And it's unavoidable for physicians who practice in smaller and more remote places. So while treatment guidelines can be constraining, another physician said, as one physician said, we have to really fight hard if it's not in the NCCN guidelines. But those guidelines are also very valuable. The NCCN guidelines keep everyone on the straight and narrow and make sure that even if you go to Podunk Hospital somewhere, you have the ability to receive standard, top-notch care. But even with all of the challenges, oncologists are excited. They're excited because new basic science understanding and its clinical translation are astounding. And there's the sense that recent advances have barely scratched the surface of what's coming. As Navana said, immunotherapy's taken all of us by storm. Lung cancer, for heaven's sake, bladder cancer. That's really exciting that these things work. And another physician said, it's getting more complicated, but this is still the part of my job that excites me the most. To conclude, I'm going to return to where we started. It's getting harder and harder to get physicians to talk to us. But with all these new products, we need to shepherd successfully to the clinic. We need to talk to them, perhaps now more than ever. Now, representative and generalizable perspectives will always be our research goal and the standard against which successful research is to be judged. But low response rates and the fact that some physicians will never make themselves available to us mean we must find ways to get valid information with the resources we have. Articulate, thoughtful, candid, and willing physicians are an invaluable resource from which we need to wring as much as we can. And we can make a virtue of necessity. So thank you for your time.